The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Windsor Castle as young Prince George adjusted his school blazer for what seemed like the 100th time. At 11 years old, he had grown accustomed to the weight of royal expectations, but today felt different. Today marked the annual summer garden party, an event where extended royal family members, dignitaries, and carefully selected guests would gather for an afternoon of polite conversation and practiced smiles. Catherine, Princess of Wales, placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder as they walked through the marble corridors. "Remember what we discussed," she said softly, her voice carrying that mix of warmth and firmness that only a mother could master. "Be polite, shake hands firmly, and if anyone makes you uncomfortable, I'll find your father or me immediately." George nodded, though his attention had already drifted to the distant sounds of preparation outside. Staff members rushed about with silver trays, florists made last-minute adjustments to elaborate arrangements, and security personnel spoke into their radio devices with practiced efficiency. The young prince had witnessed countless such events, yet each one brought its own nervous energy. King Charles III had insisted on this particular gathering as a way to strengthen family bonds and present a united front to the public. The past years had been turbulent for the monarchy, with constant media scrutiny and family tensions occasionally spilling into public view. This garden party was meant to show harmony, to demonstrate that despite differences and difficulties, the royal family remained strong. Among the guests arriving that morning was Tom Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla's son from her first marriage. At 48 years old, Tom had carved out his own career as a food writer and critic, generally staying away from the intense spotlight that followed his mother and stepfather. He arrived at Windsor with his children, eager to expose them to this slice of royal life while maintaining his usual preference for staying in the background. Tom had always had a complicated relationship with royal protocol. Unlike his mother, who had gradually learned to navigate the intricate rules and expectations of palace life, Tom preferred his independence. He loved his mother dearly and respected King Charles, but the formality of royal events often left him feeling constrained, like wearing a suit several sizes too small. As guests began filling the vast garden, the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Tables draped in crisp white linens held towers of sandwiches, scones, and pastries. Servers in immaculate uniforms circulated with champagne and tea. A string quartet played softly near the rose garden, their music floating on the warm summer breeze. Prince George made his rounds with the practiced ease of someone born into this world. He shook hands, made small talk about school and hobbies, and smiled for the occasional photograph. His younger siblings, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, stayed closer to their parents, not yet required to engage in quite so much formal interaction. The incident that would change the course of that peaceful afternoon began innocuously enough. Tom Parker Bowles, holding a glass of champagne, I had been engaged in conversation with several guests near the ornamental fountain. His children had wandered off to explore the gardens under the watchful eyes of their nanny, leaving Tom to navigate the social landscape on his own. Prince George, having completed a circuit of handshakes with a group of elderly dignitaries, decided to take a momentary break near that same fountain. The young prince had always been fascinated by the bronze sculpture at its center, depicting Neptune surrounded by dolphins. He stood there, watching the water cascade and catching his breath from the social exertion. Tom noticed the young prince and felt a surge of familial affection. After all, this was his stepfather's grandson, a boy he'd known since birth, even if their interactions had been limited. In Tom's mind, this was a casual family gathering, and the rules of formality could be relaxed for a moment. He approached George with a friendly smile, raising his champagne glass in greeting. "George, taking a breather, are you?" Tom called out, his voice carrying that jovial tone he typically reserved for friends at dinner parties. "Can't blame you. These things can be rather exhausting." George turned, offering a polite smile. "Hello, Tom." "Yes, just for a moment." What happened next would be recounted in various ways by different witnesses, but the core facts remained undisputed. Tom, perhaps emboldened by the champagne or simply forgetting the formal context, reached out to ruffle George's hair in what he intended as an affectionate, avuncular gesture. To Tom, it was no different than how he might interact with his own children or nephews in a casual setting. But Prince George was not simply another child. He was second in line to the British throne, a position that came with protocols and protections that extended even to such seemingly innocent interactions. The moment Tom's hand moved toward the young prince's head, multiple things happened simultaneously. George instinctively stepped back, startled by the unexpected physical contact. His training, both from his parents and from security briefings he'd received as he grew older, kicked in. While Tom meant no harm, the sudden movement and invasion of personal space triggered George's defensive instincts. More significantly, the royal protection officers stationed discreetly around the garden had been watching the interaction. And these were not ordinary security guards, but highly trained professionals from the Metropolitan Police's Royalty Protection Command. Their entire purpose was to ensure the safety of the royal family, and they were trained to identify and respond to potential threats in milliseconds. Officer James Whitmore had been positioned near the fountain, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. When he saw Tom's hand moving toward Prince George and the prince's backward step, his body moved before his conscious mind could fully process the scene. Years of training took over, and he closed the distance between himself and Tom in 3 rapid strides. "Sir, step back," Whitmore commanded, his voice sharp and authoritative. His hand gripped Tom's upper arm firmly, not violently but with unmistakable control. And the champagne glass slipped from Tom's other hand, shattering on the stone pathway with a sound that seemed to echo across the suddenly quiet garden. Tom's face went from confusion to indignation in an instant. "What on earth?" he sputtered, trying to pull his arm free. "I'm family! I was just saying hello to the boy." But Whitmore wasn't listening to explanations. His priority was the prince's safety, and until he could assess the situation fully, Tom Parker Bowles was a potential threat regardless of his family connections. Another protection officer, Sarah Chen, had already moved to George's side, creating a physical barrier between the prince and Tom. "Are you all right, Your Royal Highness?" Chen asked quietly, her eyes never leaving Tom. George, whose heart was racing from the sudden commotion, nodded. "I'm fine. He didn't hurt me. He was just—" But his words were drowned out by the growing murmur of voices as other guests noticed the confrontation. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and smartphones discreetly emerged from pockets and handbags. The peaceful garden party had transformed into something else entirely. Tom, still held firmly by Officer Whitmore, felt heat rising to his face. The embarrassment of being manhandled in front of hundreds of witnesses mixed with genuine anger at what he perceived as an overreaction. "This is absurd!" he protested, his voice rising. "I'm the Queen's son. I've known this child since he was born." Prince William appeared from seemingly nowhere, his face a careful mask of concern mixed with practiced calm. Behind him came King Charles and Queen Camilla, both moving quickly despite their age and formal attire. Catherine had already reached George, her hands on his shoulders as she checked him over with a mother's thorough eye. "What's happened here?" William asked, his voice controlled but carrying an edge that suggested he already understood the situation was serious. Officer Whitmore maintained his grip on Tom while addressing the Prince of Wales. "Sir, there was physical contact attempted with Prince George. I responded according to protocol." Tom's face grew redder. "Physical contact? I was ruffling his hair. For God's sake, I'm his step-grandfather's son. This is family." Queen Camilla reached her son's side, her face pale with distress. She understood both sides of this confrontation in a way that perhaps no one else present could. She knew her son's intentions had been innocent, but she also understood the protocols that governed royal safety. Her position, always delicate as the woman who had once been blamed for the dissolution of Charles and Diana's marriage, felt even more precarious in this moment. "Tom," she said quietly, her voice tight with emotion. "Please, let them do their job." King Charles stood beside his wife, his hand finding hers as they watched the scene unfold. His expression was difficult to read, a mixture of concern for his grandson, sympathy for his stepson, and awareness that every second of this incident was being observed and would be analyzed by media and public alike. Officer Whitmore slowly released Tom's arm, but his body remained alert, ready to intervene again if necessary. Tom rubbed his arm where the officer's grip had been, not because it hurt, but as a gesture of indignation. "I apologize if my actions seemed threatening," Tom said, though his tone suggested he didn't feel much need to apologize. "I was simply greeting my family member in a friendly manner. I didn't realize that had become a criminal offense." William stepped closer, his voice low enough that only those immediately around them could hear. "Tom, the security protocols exist for George's protection. They're not personal and they're not negotiable. Every person at this event, family or not, is expected to maintain appropriate boundaries." "Appropriate boundaries?" Tom's voice dripped with sarcasm. "We're at a family garden party, not a state funeral. The boy is my mother's stepchild's grandson. I've been to his birthday parties, for heaven's sake." Catherine, still with her hands on George's shoulders, spoke for the first time. Her voice was gentle but firm. "And we appreciate your family connection, Tom. But George is also a young person who deserves to have his personal space respected, regardless of who you are. The security officers were doing their job, protecting our son." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other guests had formed a loose circle around the confrontation, close enough to watch, but far enough to maintain plausible deniability about their eavesdropping. The string quartet had stopped playing. Even the fountain seemed to gurgle more quietly. George, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on him, spoke up in a voice that was surprisingly steady for his age. "I'm all right, really. I just wasn't expecting it." Tom didn't mean anything bad. His words, innocent and honest, somehow made the situation more complicated rather than less. They confirmed that Tom's intentions had been benign, but they also highlighted the very problem the security protocols were designed to address, that unexpected physical contact, even from family, could startle and potentially endanger the young prince. Queen Camilla's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked between her son and her step-grandson. This was her worst nightmare, having her two worlds collide in such a public and uncomfortable way. She had spent years trying to build bridges between her children from her first marriage and the royal family she had married into, and now those bridges felt fragile. Officer Whitmore, understanding that the immediate physical threat had passed, but that the situation remained volatile, spoke to William. "Sir, I recommend we move Prince George back inside. We can debrief on the incident privately and determine appropriate